Now, as chapter 12 begins, we find Jesus and his disciples in a couple of situations where he establishes himself as the Lord of the Sabbath and continues to establish his authority more and more as the Son of Man, the Son of God, and the Lord of all. So beginning in verse 1 of chapter 12, we read, "At that time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day." And just to pause here for a second, you have to realize that the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin in general, including the scribes, Hebrew leadership in general, they were not very happy with Jesus, and so pretty much everywhere he went, they were looking for something to pick on him about. They were looking for something to entrap him or ensnare him about. And as he became more and more bold about being the Messiah, about being the one who was fulfilling Old Testament scriptures concerning Messiah, they became more adamant to try to catch him in any kind of error that they could. So just keep that in mind as we move forward through these chapters in Matthew and through the Gospels in general. Continuing now in verse 3, "But he," Jesus, "said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God, and did eat the showbread which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests? Or have ye not read in the law, how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you, that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, ye would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day." Now there are three things taking place in this passage that we want to look at for a few moments. One of them is that he points out an event that's recorded dealing with David and having men with him, King David having men with him, and they went into the temple on a particular day, and there were two types of bread that are referred to. Actually, there are three types of bread that are referred to in Hebrew tradition. One type of bread is challah, and the challah bread is the showbread. It's the bread that is only for the priests in the temple. Now the challah bread is shared during feasts, during the Sabbath day, and it's a special, sometimes made as a braided bread. It's a more special bread than the standard bread, which is lechem. And lechem is just your standard loaf of bread. In fact, the town, Bethlehem, is actually Bethlehem, as we say it in English. Bethlehem actually means the house of bread. And I find it very wonderful that our Savior, the bread of life, Jesus Christ, was born in the house of bread. And the third kind of bread is matzah. And of course, matzah is that dry bread, that crackery type of bread. It's a bread that's made without leaven so that it doesn't rise. It's a bread that's made in haste, and it's used to illustrate the haste with which the children had to leave Egypt during the Passover. So this would be the most fancy of those three breads. This would be the showbread or the challah bread that Jesus is referring to here. And of course, the scribes, the Pharisees, any one of the Hebrew leaders here and any one of the devout Hebrews would obviously know exactly what he's talking about here. So he said they had a need and they ate. Now, it wasn't lawful in that it wasn't under the law, and yet they had a need and they went in and they ate and they satisfied a need. There is an illustration in the Old Testament where a man is found gathering sticks on the Sabbath day, and it's determined that that man should be stoned because he was violating the law, considering doing servile work on the Sabbath day. Reason being is because he had 6 days to gather the sticks. He should not have been out there gathering the sticks on the seventh day. He was in violation of the law that was in force at that time. However, this was a case where people had an immediate need. There was no way for them to prepare for themselves to have food. They came in after a long journey. They were hungry. They needed food. And the showbread was what was available. And David and the men ate the showbread. They had a need of food. So there's a difference. Jesus is pointing out here in this illustration that the law is there to illustrate for us what our shortcomings are before God, how easy it is for us to partake in wrongdoing. But the law is not something that's meant to preclude common sense. The problem was, by this time, the law had swung the pendulum, and it was either being kept so implicitly that it was ridiculous, or it was being kept so explicitly that you couldn't violate even the tiniest little jot or tittle without suffering some sort of severe consequence. Now, the interesting part was that the people who were in power, the people who enforced the law, so to speak, they knew all the loopholes, all the lawyer tricks, the ways in and out of the law. The common person, they didn't know these things, and they often ended up suffering, and it often ended up being a monetary type of thing that they suffered because they couldn't necessarily afford to offer the sacrifice. So that's a little bit of historical background there. The other illustration that's given here as well is the priests profaning the temple on the Sabbath day, and that is that the priests are actually doing work in the temple on the Sabbath day. They're actually doing servile work. That would be saying God's contradicting himself, because they have to do sacrifice. There are things they have to do. They have to take care of the temple. They have to do sacrifice. They have to take care of their responsibilities. So again, it's not a matter of the law preventing common sense things from taking place or needs from being met. It's a matter of the law pointing us in the direction of righteousness. And this was what was totally being missed. But notice how Jesus addresses himself in verse 6, and he says, "Here, but I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple." I'm greater than the temple. In fact, the temple was built for me. He is the Jehovah of the Old Testament. He is the great I Am. He is the one who came down and dwelt in the Holy of Holies at the mercy seat. He is the one who was the pillar of a cloud by day and the pillar of a fire by night for the Hebrews in the wilderness for those 40 years. This is that same I Am, that same Jehovah God that they're speaking to right now. God come in the flesh, Emmanuel.